By the end of this show, if you bear with me, I think you will know more about the Ed Donatel new Minnesota Vikings defense than like 90% of fans. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. This is one I have been working toward for a long time, and I think we're ready. My name is Luke Braun. I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. And today I am going to challenge you. But I think it's going to be worth it. So I want you to bear with me. We're going to learn the Vikings defense in its principles today. Obviously, I'm not going to show you an entire playbook. We can't do that in a half an hour. But I think if I can get you to understand a couple of the principles, you're going to be able to sit there on the couch and like ID coverages. And how cool will your friends think you are? And you'll be like, that's cover 8. And they'll be like, what? And you'll be like, yep, I know that. That's cover 8. And the linebacker was supposed to widen out less there. Like, that's where I want you to be. But there's also some news. The Vikings cut a couple of players. They needed to get their roster down to 80. They released a couple, they did a couple like injury things, and then they actually like released a couple players in earnest. Those players are Harrison Hand and Sean Beyer, and the injured players are Ryan Connolly and Blake Prohl. So the injured players isn't actually a release. It's just that now we're close enough to this season where you can put players on reserve / physically unable to perform. That is a different kind of pup list where the rules are different. Before, you basically could come back anytime. If you're on active / physically unable to perform, it means, hey, you're not ready to start camp because of an injury or whatever, but as soon as you can pass a physical, you're in. Now, they have been moved to reserve pup. And the advantage of that is that they no longer count against the roster, so they can count technically as a couple of your cuts. But now those guys aren't allowed to play until 4 weeks of the regular season have passed. Ryan Connolly and Blake Prohl. So that means they weren't going to be ready by the first 4 weeks of the season, and now they don't have to be. And now that you can do that instead of cutting someone. So great. The two cuts, just straight up releases, are Sean Beyer and Harrison Hand. Sean Beyer was the last guy. He was like player 90, so this isn't very surprising. Didn't do a lot in camp or anything. Harrison Hand, some people were surprised by. He was nickel corner 4, y'all. He was in some trouble. It's kind of a bummer because when he played in 2020, he did have some promising moments that I actually was pretty excited about. I wrote a whole article about. But it just never really materialized the way that I hoped that it could. He was behind Chris Boyd. He was behind Caleb Evans. And he was behind Nate Hairston and Perry Nickerson. Like, he was struggling in this camp quite a bit. And it sucks. He actually had a decent game against the 49ers. I thought maybe he acquitted himself. Maybe he earned himself a chance to try to sneak on the roster in the Denver game, but no such luck. So, no Harrison Hand anymore. No Sean Beyer. The Vikings are down to 80. Next roster cut will be the big one, all the way down to 53. And that'll happen after this Denver game. Speaking of Denver, that is where the Fangio system came from, at least as we run it, because that's where Ed Donatel came from. So I want to explain this defense. I call it the Fangio defense. Some people had issue with that because it's the Donatel defense, which I'm sure he has his own wrinkles and his own variations of it. But the large scale skeleton, the basics, the stuff that we as fans have to work hard just to get this super 101 level to do it, right? But I think we should work that hard. I think we should try to get down that 101 level. And then when it comes to actual variations, look, if we can get to the level where we're talking about how Ed Donatel does it different from Fangio, does it different from Staley, and so on, then I have done my job, if that's the conversation that we're having. So I call it the Fangio defense, just like you call it the West Coast offense, even if you're running it, in New England. It's the Fangio scheme that Ed Donatel is running his version of. Get it? Got it? Good. The one thing that you need to understand about this, and I genuinely mean this, if you can get this next thing that I'm going to say, and nothing else sticks in your brain, just this, then you'll pretty much understand the thesis here. And the rest of it is just how this manifests. But the I think the most important thing, and I'm talking about coverages here. This is a coverages episode. So I'm not talking about run defenses or blitzes or anything. That can be a project for another day. And we'll get to know them as we see the season, as we see the ones the Vikings actually use. But the one thing to understand here is that the Fangio defense exists and lives in the too high world. Always. Just about always, except in certain cover one looks. But even those cover one looks look like too high to begin with. And it's really hard to tell the coverages apart because the safeties always do the exact same thing. That's the big kahuna. That's the point. Now, if you understand what cover 2 and cover 4 are, if you're a Madden player or if you just have picked that up through osmosis through watching games, you'll be able to keep up with all of this, because if you do cover 2 on one side and cover 4 on the other side, that's called cover 6. And in some Fangio style defenses, they'll call it cover 6/8, depending on which side the 4 side is and which side the 2 side is. They'll call it 6 or 8, depending. I'm not going to bog you down with that, even though I think the Vikings do use that terminology. I'm trying to keep it a little simpler. So for now, we'll just call it all cover 6. And it's also referred to as quarter, quarter, half, or half, quarter, quarter. You get it? A half on one side and quarter, quarter on the other side. And whichever one is said first is the strong side of the formation, the passing strength. Now, whether you are running cover 1, whether you're running one of those cover 6 versions, whether you're running a cover 3 version, they will always start the safeties in too high, and then they will rotate those safeties to where they actually have to be for the coverage. But when you start your snap cadence, you will be looking at too high safeties. Quarterbacks hate this. Quarterbacks can't stand this, because if you ask, somebody should ask Kirk Cousins. This would be a great Kirk Cousins question. What's the first thing you look at when you get to the line of scrimmage? He will tell you the safeties. The safeties are the first thing that he notices. And the question he's asking, the first decision in the flow chart, is it too high or one high? And that gives him some level of information. But if you're up against a Fangio defense, the answer is always going to be too high. And therefore, if every single thing that they run can be run with too high safeties, then you don't get any information. And it makes it that much harder to figure out what's going on. If you understand that idea, where they're not all too high safety defenses. There are single high defenses in the Fangio system. But if you understand that it always looks like it's going to be too high before the snap and then rotates to whatever it's going to be, then you understand the crux of the Fangio defense. And honestly, the rest of this is just ways that manifests itself and ways to actually achieve that. And if you're interested in that, we're going to keep going here. But if you understand that, then you got it, and I did my job. All right? But before we do that, it is hiring season. And I know some of you out there are going to be in charge of finding people to fill a position that can be an absolute nightmare, and that's what LinkedIn Jobs is for. You need the right people on your team to help your business, small or otherwise, fire on all cylinders. And LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Look, it's tough out there to find the right people. You get stacks of resumes. You have no idea who's submitting for your job, but that's what LinkedIn Jobs is for. Every week, some 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn. They have all kinds of simple tools like screening questions and stuff that make it easy to focus and hone in on the candidates that are right for you and your job and your team, because everybody's team is different and you got to find the people that are right. Small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview starting August 31st. It's an 8-episode epic to get you ready for the NFL season. The local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey NFL Insiders are all combining into one big, giant NFL preview. It starts August 31st. You can search Ultimate Pro Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. I would also love it if you checked out the History Doc I got a really interesting comment on Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, about somebody's experience of the 80s. This guy that lived in the South and couldn't watch the games because they didn't like show non-regional games back in the 80s. So he had to like drive out 150 miles on a motorcycle in the winter to find a hotel that was like showing the games. And that was like, he would do that for like the Les Steckel year. And his experience is so interesting. I love hearing that stuff. So go to patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. You can watch the first 4 parts for free. Part 5 coming out this weekend. That covers the 90s. Let me know about your experiences too, especially if you have memories of the 60s, 70s, or 80s. And hey, if you have memories of the 90s, I certainly do. So if you're my age, you do, then you might like what comes out this weekend. Okay, let's get back into the dense X's and O's stuff. So that's part A that I want you to walk away with is always 2 high safeties to start. And then whatever the coverage is, the safeties just post snap rotate over there. So what are those coverages? Well, what we saw in the preseason game sort of confirmed a fear that I had for this season. And a fear is maybe a dramatic word. It's something I think is going to make the defense perform worse statistically, produce worse this season. And I think it's going to be a necessity just because of personnel and because they are transitioning into it. It's one of those things that it's a problem that will go away with time, but it sure will be present to begin with. And it's that they're just not using a lot of cover 1. It's just not a lot of that there. They're calling a lot of cover 6s, a lot of weeks rotated cover 3 kind of stuff. Some of them call that cover 9. And all that means is, you start with the 2 high safeties. Well, in cover 3, you only need 1 deep defender in the middle, and then the 2 corners are deep. So one of those safeties rotates down. Weak rotated or strong rotated just tells you which safety that is. What we're seeing so far is the vast majority of the calls have been some variation on cover 6, which is kind of what we expected, because what cover 6 means is you got cover 2 on one of the sides of the field. When you are a cornerback and the call is cover 2 to your side, you don't have a very hard job as far as cornerback jobs go. You have a flat responsibility. So whatever receiver is in front of you, if he is going deep, all you got to do is give him a shove, influence him in some way, screw him up, mess up his timing or something, and then play whatever is in the flat. Now, what's interesting to me is which side do you make the 2 side and which side do you make the 4 side? Which one do you do half? Which one do you do quarter? You would think you would want quarter on the passing strength side, which means the side with more threats on it, right? If they have a bunch of receivers on one side, you probably want quarters on that side because you'll have more defenders on that side to deal with the more people. And that's probably the base look. Donatel has been doing the opposite a lot. And that's pretty interesting to think about why he would do that. And from like a mad scientist kind of perspective, that is the reasons that like the thought path that makes you go down is really cool. Think about it. Why would you want a corner in a flat responsibility to the passing strength? Well, what if it's a short pass or a little swing pass or a stupid little bunch screen or something? Aren't those all over the league right now? I mean, they're running so much across the league of that kind of stupid bubble screen thing. The Packers love it. It's a huge staple for the Packers. It's like how their whole RPO game works. Well, okay, that's a pretty cool idea. Further, if you know what a poach safety is, you're going to put this together really fast. But in quarters, so on what would be the weak side with fewer people where they're playing quarters in this kind of variation, if you're just playing straight up quarters where both sides are covered for, you'll have a safety on the weak side that very often has nothing to do. Unless they're running 4 verticals, that guy won't have a lot to do, right? So they will make him a poach safety. I'm like highly oversimplifying things here. But he will play what's called like a poach responsibility, where instead of double covering somebody on the weak side or something, they'll actually say, your first job, as long as nobody's coming vertical at you, is to help the strong side of the formation. And you're going to kind of disguise that you're doing that. And you can see how this works with the everything is too high until it looks like it's too high until it isn't kind of deal. You're going to make it look like you're just a helpful little quarter safety. You're just going to play your deep responsibility. And then at the last second, you break down at something coming across the field, which many plays have something coming across the field, and you want the quarterback to think that is open, and then you're going to steal it. You might even say you're going to poach it. That responsibility on the quarters side of a cover six call, if that quarters side doesn't have a lot of threats to deal with, is pretty cool. That's a real helpful thing to do, especially against cover two, which can have some pretty classic holes in it that have been exploited for 30 years, right? Well, the poach safety can help you handle some of those. Now this all starts to click. So I'm going to keep reviewing here because I think it helps. If you walk away from this understanding, the two high safety and then they rotate to whatever thing, and that the Vikings appear to be living in a lot of cover six because it asks less of their corners on average. And the corners are the group that I think are the weak link here. We don't have that great of an idea of what we're getting out of Dantzler. How much can Patrick Peterson do? How much can Chandon Sullivan do? The rookies are unknowns. That's the group you kind of need to protect right now versus the safeties. Really excited about Seen and Bynum, and Harrison Smith is Harrison Smith. You want to ask a little bit more of them and a little bit less of the corners. So we're going to live in cover six. So cover six and two high safeties all the time until it rotates. Those are the two things I need you to walk away with. Next, I'm going to tell you exactly how one of these play calls works, just as an example. And you can kind of start to understand if you actually scrub through tape, understanding that, you can start to pick out these play calls and go, that's that one. That's that one. There's a little memorization involved. I'm not going to do that with you, but I'm going to show you where it is if you really want to be a geek about it and blow your friends away come week one. The second they zoom out to the all 22 and you can see what the safeties did. That's the next goal. This might also help you a little bit with Grambling. BetOnline is the one-stop shop for all things Grambling. You can find just about any bet you want out there. You can bet on any NFL game. You can bet on a random Week 13 game. If you felt so inclined, you can do that. You can bet on whether the Vikings will make the playoffs, how many wins they'll have. Their over-under has gone up to 9.5 since I've been talking about it. So that might change things. You can bet on who will finish where in the division for second, third, fourth. You can bet, of course, on Super Bowls and futures and prop bets. You can build player prop bets like custom crazy parlays. You can even bet right in the middle of an event. And it's not just football. It's basketball, baseball, hockey, tennis, MMA, whatever's going on. So head on over to betonline.net. Get yourself a Grambling. Bet Online, where the game starts. Okay, so I want to take you through an example of a play call here. And I don't need to bog you down with what the actual words are. So I'm just going to give you one example, and you don't need to memorize that these are the rules. You just need to understand that this is how the rules function. So there's a play call called luggage. It is a base call out of base personnel. So we're talking Armon Watts, Harrison Phillips, Dalvin Tomlinson. You've got the two, we'll call them outside linebackers, Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith. You got two linebackers, Kendricks and Hicks, and then you have your base four members of the secondary. It is an under front call, luggage. I like to remember that because luggage has a U in it, U for under. And that tells the three technique and the 4-eye which side of the formation to be on. And so sometimes that'll be Watts and Tomlinson on one side or on the other side, right? So let's say Tomlinson's the 3 technique. He will be on the weak side in an under front. So wherever the tight end isn't. And that means that Watts will be on the other side. He'll be at 4-eye or 4 technique, or sometimes you tweak that based on game plan, and he'll be on the strong side of the formation. Then you have at like classic edge rusher alignments. You'll have both the Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter. That's universal. And then Harrison Phillips, the nose tackle, will be shaded depending on the call. So the call will sound something like luggage right or luggage left, or sometimes they'll actually call it to a player. They say luggage number 18 if they want a game plan that way. And what that means is it tells a bunch of people where to line up. So luggage left would mean that the left outside linebacker is the pass rusher. Because that's the thing. You're lining up 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, but you're not. This isn't a blitz. So one of those 2 linebackers is backing off into coverage, and luggage left tells you that the left guy is rushing and that means the right guy is backing off. So it tells Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith what to do. And in luggage in particular, you tell the nose tackle that you shade opposite whatever the call is. So if it's luggage left, then the nose tackle shades right. And now you can start to see how this comes together, right? If you have the nose tackle shading to the right, and you're always going to send the guy on the opposite side of the nose tackle pass rushing, because that's what the call says, you're always going to have an outside linebacker rushing on the opposite side of where the nose tackle is. And you can start to see the utility about that if you start to think about how O-line sets their protections. The center is usually going to be responsible for this. And they are reacting. The first thing they're doing is looking at where the nose tackle is. Where's that big boy? And I'm probably going to be responsible for that big boy. And so I'm going to turn the protection toward him. It's a very default state of affairs. And if they want to call a protection and adjust it to turn the other way, they can do that, but that's kind of a drastic move. So for the most part, you're going to have a center helping with the nose tackle, and that means you're going to have Danielle Hunter rushing. This is a really good way to get a one-on-one. Is going to be rushing on a side of the protection where they've called man-to-man. And so it's really likely that he's going to be one-on-one, especially because that 4-eye, Armon Watts or Dalvin Tomlinson is the 3-tech, depending on which side the tight end is on. One of those guys is also going to be rushing. So you're going to have 2 one-on-one matchups on that side when you call this front, basically guaranteed, unless the offense wants to go nuclear and start turning the protection away from the nose tackle. And that is where the nose tackle can start to get pass rush production if they wanted to start doing that. And that's up to them. You pick your poison. The other thing is that will tell you, so luggage is a cover 6 base call, and luggage left will also tell you which side is the quarter side and which side is the half side. What's the 4 side? What's the 2 side? I believe luggage has the quarter side to the side you called on. So if it's luggage left, quarters to the left and halves to the right. This is the part where I once again say you can call quarters 18, right? If you're really scared of number 18, maybe some defenses who play against the Vikings will be, you can say, all right, luggage 18, and that means quarters to whatever side that guy's on, because we need the extra help over there. And all this can be adjusted and tweaked and stuff for game plan, and that's the stuff you talk about in the meetings. But that's more or less how it works. Luggage left tells every defensive lineman has something in there, whether it's the U for under or the left or whatever, that tells them where to align. The linebackers set themselves based on the D-line too, so that actually tells the whole front 7 where to start, and it tells them who is pass rushing and who isn't, and it also tells the coverage what to be. So everybody gets all the information that they need just from those 2 words. And because it always looks exactly the same pre-snap, quarterbacks won't know what the heck you just called. And they won't be able to tell till after the snap. And by that point, they won't know if it's too late or not. That's the basis of the Fangio defense. So even if everything I just went over in this last segment totally went over your head and you have to listen to it 4 times, I would love it if you did that. But even if all that's totally missed, if you walk away from this knowing that they love to have 2 safeties high and that they're going to live in cover 6 this year as a way to protect developing corners, and that these fronts are designed to generate particular matchups, and each one of these has a different set of rules and different set of things to make a one-on-one for a different guy, and it just depends on who you're attacking and what matchup you like, and that's what you're deciding in the game plan, which fronts you're going to live in today. If you understand those dynamics and how they interact with each other, then you get it. Then you probably understand more about a Fangio defense than like 90% of football fans. If you understand that, and that's what I want Locked On Vikings listeners to be. I want to be able to advance you a little bit. And you'll be able to look at who's rushing against who against Denver. If you're going to be bored in the preseason game because you don't want to watch any of these non-starters, look at who's rushing against who. Look at what kinds of alignments there are and where they are. As we move on and move through this, we can go through more of those calls, but at that point, it just becomes a memorization game where you go, okay, yeah, luggage is an underfront, and that means this and that. And The luggage is base under, and stuff is a different one. Stuff is a nickel, and there's also patty. That's a different kind. I think that's a penny. Like there's all this memorization that has to go in, and all these words will change every year, and as you get to different people, and this is the learning curve part. But I don't need to make you do any of that memorization. All I want is for you to understand the base concepts, and hopefully we got there today. Tomorrow we'll keep going. I have a 53-man roster coming out soon with Nick Olson. We did another joint thing. So I'll talk about like my 53-man prediction, how it's changed, why it's changed. That'll come out hopefully sometime this week. So we'll talk about that soon as well. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.